Λοιπόν, δεν ώρα. Καλό απόγευμα, αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι, αγαπητοί φίλοι και φίλες. Good afternoon, dear colleagues and friends. Σας καλωσορίζουμε στο δεύτερο σεμινάριο που οργανώνει η Επιτροπή μας αυτόν τον πρώτο χρόνο της λειτουργίας της, στο οποίο θα αναπτυχθούν δύο θέματα, αλληλένδετα φυσικά, αφού όλα τα θέματα ενέργειας και περιβάλλοντος πλέον συνδέονται μεταξύ τους και αλληλοεπιδρούν το ένα στο άλλο. Η συζήτηση για ανανεώσιμες πηγές ενέργειας, τη διείσδυσή τους στα παραδοσιακά μοντέλα ηλεκτρικής ενέργειας, τις εκτιμήσεις των περιβαλλοντικών επιπτώσεων και ούτω καθεξής γίνεται επιτακτική και πιο επίκαιρη υπό το πρίσμα του πολέμου στην Ουκρανία. Το πρώτο θέμα έχει αναλάβει ο συνάδελφος Χαράλαμπος Προύντζος, ο οποίος και θα αναπτύξει τις προκλήσεις στη διείσδυση των ΑΠΕ στο μοντέλο αγοράς της ηλεκτρικής ενέργειας στην Κύπρο. Για το δεύτερο θέμα, που θα αγγίξει τις εκτιμήσεις των περιβαλλοντικών επιπτώσεων στην κυπριακή πραγματικότητα, θα μας μιλήσει ο συνάδελφος Κυριάκος Κούρτελος. Both subjects will be presented in the English language, and we thank both our speakers, Charalambos and Kyriakos, for the effort and time they have put into making this webinar possible. Πρέπει να αναφέρομαι ότι αυτό το webinar βιντεοσκοπείται. This webinar is being recorded. Ο Παγκύπριος Δικηγορικός Σύλλογος θα καταχωρήσει τη μία μονάδα, το CPD point, στο τέλος του webinar αυτού, σε όσους το παρακολουθήσουν μέχρι το τέλος. So the CPD point will be credited by the Cyprus Bar Association to everybody who will watch this webinar until the end. Questions on substance can be put by using the icon Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Οι ερωτήσεις επί της ουσίας θα γίνονται στο Q&A, το εικονίδιο, πάνω στην οθόνη σας, στο toolbar κάτω από την οθόνη σας, και οτιδήποτε άλλη απορία αν έχετε θα μπορείτε να την κάνετε στο chat. So, our first speaker today is Charalambos Prούντζος. Charalambos is a partner with Ernst & Young, leading the law services for Central, Eastern, Southeastern Europe and Central Asia, including, of course, the Cyprus law practice. He's a barrister at law of Gray's Inn and holds a diploma in professional legal skills from the City University and an LLB honors from the University of Bristol. Charalambos is the co-founder and owner of Prούντζos & Prούντζos LLC law firm. He deals with a variety of energy-related transactions and advisory work, restructurings, due diligence exercises, reviews of tender documents, both in the pre-awarding phase as well as the litigation phase, before the governmental authorities as well as the Cyprus Supreme Court. Charalambos, the floor is yours.
Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. Thank you very much. Have been asked to present in English today, so allow me just to manage to get Zoom in order. Let me know if you can see the slides.
Ναι, μια χαρά.
So a very warm welcome to everyone, and thank you to Leah and Melina and Kyriakos for inviting me to present. My presentation will be focusing on the to be introduced competitive electricity market model. And in specific, I'm going to be speaking about the challenges in the penetration of renewables. It's a very complicated topic because apart from its legal aspects, there are a lot of technical and financial elements involved in it. So please feel free to ask any questions. I will be responding to the ones that I can.
If I may add that the questions will be put at the end of the session, of each session, unless you want to be interrupted, Charalambos. It's up to you.
Of course. So I'm switching slides. Leah, if you can confirm that they are being switched. Yeah. Okay, good.
Yes.
So a brief overview of the electricity market in Cyprus. I'm going to start with the key stakeholders of the market. First of all, we have the Cyprus Energy Regulatory Authority, SERA, which is a regulator for the electricity market and for the gas market in Cyprus. We have the transmission system operator, known as TSO, which has and will have a dual hat as of October 2022, that of the system operator, so the grid, as we call it, the transmission grid, and as market operator, which is a new hat that the TSO will be wearing in the new market. We've got the distribution system operator, which is a EAC for Cyprus, the transmission system owner, which is the EAC, and the distribution system owner, which is again the EAC. The difference between the two is that the owner is the one that owns the grid physically as an asset, whereas the operator is the one that is managing it and operating it. Producers obviously are key stakeholders in the system. We've got different categories. We've got the conventional producers, which means producers producing electricity from fossil fuel, and the renewable energy sources producers, what we call the RES producers. We have the suppliers, which is a major sort of new introduction in a competitive market, whereas up until now, we had a single supplier in Cyprus, which was EAC Supply, after the separation of the functions of EAC. Now it is allowed by the law and by the market rules for an entity, a person, to be a supplier of electricity without necessarily being a producer. Yeah, we've got the aggregators, which are basically, and I will go into that later, they are participants in the market that are aggregating production from renewable energy sources up to 20 megawatts, and they are basically managing it on behalf of smaller producers. And finally, we have retail consumers. Now, for the scope of this presentation, retail consumers are not part of the new market. So the market, the new competitive market, relates only to what we call wholesale consumers and not retail consumers. So these are the stakeholders. Some keynotes that I would like to say by way of an overview is that supply to date had been monopolized and by EAC. That's about to end, and hence we will have a competitive market. We currently have production from both the Electricity Authority of Cyprus and the private sector. The new market model is expected to be introduced in October 2022. This is the date that the relevant Parliamentary Committee on Energy Matters has received by way of a commitment by the key stakeholders as the starting date for the full operation of the new competitive market. And until we reach the operation of the new market, we have an intermediate market model currently in place where we can have freedom of supply from suppliers other than the EAC, but only on the basis of bilateral contracts. And for certain categories of renewables, they are still selling their production to the Electricity Authority of Cyprus at the pricing of what we call avoidance cost. Avoidance cost essentially is the price that it would have cost to the Electricity Authority of Cyprus to produce itself under a very, very specific and complicated formula, which has undergone significant scrutiny over the years. Renewable energy producers that have entered what we call the first phase of the intermediate market will be benefiting essentially from this tariff, which is very high at the moment because of the skyrocketing of fossil fuel. Now, when we talk about the electricity market in Cyprus, obviously we want to know what we're talking about. And at the top of the page, you can see a graph for renewables. And at the bottom of the page, I don't know how visible it is, we've got a table, it's in Greek actually, which shows a conventional production. Both of these tables are sourced by the website of the Transmission system operator, and as a lawyer, I've managed to put the credits at the bottom right-hand side of my slide. So we've got 284.7 megawatts of installed photovoltaics. We are talking about installed capacity, yeah? We've got 155.1 megawatts of wind parks that are connected on the transmission system, and 2.4 megawatts that are connected on the distribution system, 12.1 megawatts of biomass. And there are two other important figures. So we've got another 295.1 megawatts of approved license capacity of renewables to be installed, which is a huge number bearing in mind where we are now. Yeah. And the total of installed and approved power for renewables is 594.3 megawatts. The conventional installed capacity is 440 megawatts at the Vasilikos by way of combined cycle. Steam turbines of 750, both in Degelia and Vasilikos, with the Degelia ones being very problematic in terms of emissions due to the repercussions of the new emissions system. And another 187.5 in Vasilikos and Moni. Moni is basically used as a reserve capacity, and two smaller internal combustion engines of a total 100 megawatts. So the total is 1,478. However, the expected available power is at 899 megawatts. Now, something that I did not put in the slide, and that was on purpose because, you know, I don't want to enter into very technical matters, is that the peak demand for Cyprus at the moment is around 1,000 megawatts. The average demand, taking out, you know, very small peak demand phases, is around 500 to 600 megawatts. So you can appreciate that at the moment, Cyprus has by far an installed capacity which is higher than its existing demand. However, there are cases where, due to the nature of renewables, conventional production is very marginally covering the demand, especially in the periods of July and August, where we are experiencing the peak demand for electricity. That is why the equation of having a new market is not just activism to include or to install more power, either by way of renewables or otherwise, but is also a very sensitive exercise of not staying without electricity at all because of the system not being able to match demand and supply. Now, what is the legal and regulatory framework? Because we are a legal audience, we've got the new law that has been very recently introduced, which is the regulation of the electricity market law of 2021, is law 131 of 2021. It came about to substitute the 2003 law with the same name. Important law is also the law for the promotion and encouragement of the use of renewable energy sources of 2013. It's very important because it's on the basis of this law that essentially the entire renewables ecosystem has been built. The creation of the Renewable Energy Sources Fund, which was funding renewables, came about together with this piece of legislation, and also priority of access to the grid for renewables was clearly determined. A very important piece of legislation, subsidiary legislation, is the regulatory decision of SERA number 1 of 2015, which was essentially the legal basis for the new market model. It deals with the detailed design for the differentiation of the regulatory framework for the functioning of the electricity market in Cyprus. SERA has its law, it's got regulations, Kappa Delta B, but it also issues regulatory decisions which are binding in its scope of regulation. Other regulatory decisions, regulations issued pursuant to the electricity market law, electricity market rules, transmission and distribution rules and manuals, and electricity market rules and manuals. The last three items are essentially drafted by the TSO and they are submitted to SERA for approval purposes. Now, this is basically a schematic depiction of the new market model. Yeah. First of all, a storyline started off in 2014 with a public consultation. Then in 2015, we had the aforementioned regulatory decision of SERA, which basically brought about the concept of the new market model. But as we live in Cyprus, it has taken 7 full years, and we are still hoping that October will be the final adjournment, let's say, or delay for the introduction of the new market in reality. So 7 years. And I'm mentioning that because you can appreciate that 7 years is a very long period of time. Things have changed dramatically in technology, also affecting energy production and supply. And for me, it's an area of concern that we did not have a systematic revision exercise of the 2015 regulatory decision before the introduction of the new market. The objectives of the new market, at least in my eyes, are 3. First of all, to finally establish a competitive market, ending essentially the monopoly of the Electricity Authority of Cyprus, especially in the supply market, to lower prices for consumers. That's a commercial comment that I'm going to make. I am not expecting a significant reduction in the prices of electricity because of the design of the model, but that's my sort of commercial, if you want, approach on the matter. And finally, last but most importantly, to enhance energy security, which is the key to having a robust and reputable electricity market. Now, the major introduction that the system, the new market model has done is the introduction of what we call a day-ahead market. So up until now, we had the supply of electricity only on the basis of bilateral contracts that the EAC largely was concluding with consumers. We're talking about wholesale consumers, I'm repeating that. Now we will have bilateral contracts, which is called the forward market. And these contracts will need to be posted in the MMS, the market management system, to know how much production has been captured by way of these bilateral contracts. And then we have the day-ahead market, which is basically a stock market of electricity to match demand and supply 1 day before the day on which either you need or you are selling electricity. Yeah. So this is a day-ahead market. It's not rocket science. It's a stock market of electricity 1 day before, in which producers and suppliers meet in a very sophisticated software to conclude transactions that relate to the sale and purchase of electricity. The items that you see with the green color are, let's say, within the competence of the TSO, the transmission system operator, as a market operator. So things like the forward market, the day-ahead market, and the settlement are things that are being taken care by the TSO in its capacity as a market operator, whereas the middle part, the integrated scheduling process and the real-time balancing market, which are issues that have to do with the credibility and the stability of the grid, so that we don't stay without air condition on the 15th of August, something that many of us, of course, would not appreciate, belong to the capacity, the competence of the TSO as system operator. So, in a nutshell, this is what we are referring to by the new market model. Yeah. Now, digging deeper into the new electricity market legislation, why was it so important from a legal and commercial standpoint? First of all, it has introduced important structural changes in a monopolistic market, fully controlled. And I'm not saying this necessarily in to accuse the EAC, but it was a result essentially of a long-standing monopoly and of the existence of professionals in the field, lawyers, technical people, which were basically babies, children of that organization, which, by the way, is very sophisticated. The EAC, despite its shortcomings in commercial areas, possibly, it is a very reputable and very capable technical organization with excellent technical professionals, something that has been confirmed repeatedly by EU officials that have discussed matters with the EAC. So we had to have structural changes to essentially disassociate the electricity market from the EAC to have a meaningful competition. The first step for that was basically to enhance, to establish basically the independence of the TSO from the EAC. And that is now clearly reflected in the law. The key staff of the TSO was staff of EAC that was usually seconded to the TSO, and even simple decisions like their promotions or the budget of the TSO had to go through the EAC. So even though in the law there were provisions to indicate some sort of autonomy and independence for the TSO, that was not the practice. Yeah, that has been now significantly improved. There is a clear duty on the TSO not to discriminate between any market player. There is a clear separation in the dual capacity of the TSO as the system operator and the market operator. This is established and reflected in the law. And very important as a forward-looking exercise, since we are getting into the era of batteries and storage, is that the ownership and operation of storage facilities by the TSO is only exceptionally allowed by the regulator according to the new legislation. This is because there has been clear interest from the private sector to enter the storage market, and there was a policy decision to allow the private sector to get into that space. Now, renewables in the new market. First of all, not all renewables are the same, and bear with me because this is a bit of a detailed exercise. We have renewables, the first ones that we had installed back in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, and people were calling me crazy when I was talking about renewables at the time, obviously. And so these ones were brought about because of a feed-in, fixed feed-in tariff regime. So basically there was a fund established, which was funded by levies on the electricity bills. And the government made these projects bankable, the first ones, by providing them a feed-in tariff for a fixed period of time. It's 20 years, basically. So for 20 years, whatever they are selling, depending on the technology, so for wind farms is 16.6 euros per kilowatt hour. For photovoltaics, they've got different tariffs. But the substance of the matter is that it was the only way to bring about something that was not bankable and started for Cyprus. Renewables participating in the intermediate market, yeah, irrespective of whether they are phase A of the intermediate market, which is cost avoidance cost, or phase B, will transition into the new market. So they will participate in the competition upon the new market entering into force. Renewables not included in the above two categories will participate in the competitive market as usual as competitive players. Yeah, renewables that are larger than 1 megawatt can participate in the market either individually or through aggregators. Aggregators have a ceiling of capacity of 20 megawatts. So any aggregator can only manage and represent in the market a maximum of 20 megawatts. The new market rules and the market model imposes very heavy obligations on renewable energy producers for the forecasting of their production. And this is done through very sophisticated systems called SCADA systems, which are essentially forecasting weather conditions to a great detail, and hence forecasting the energy yield from renewable energy sources. You can appreciate why this is done. It's done because the TSO, as the system operator, wants to make sure that we will not be having any surprises in terms of production that will not be able to meet supply, or overproduction that will destabilize the system. That is why we need a detailed forecast. But there are criticisms from the industry that we've gone a bit to the other extreme. In case there are material deviations, there will be significant cost from any player in the market. Yeah, not just from renewables, but renewables are the most vulnerable to these deviations. So if one has forecasted A and their actual production is by a mile, there are certain tolerance levels prescribed. If it exceeds the tolerance levels, then they will be paying significant costs. There is an increased risk, and this is happening already, even with the megawatts that we've got installed now, of curtailment of production from renewables due to two technical reasons: lack of storage and lack of interconnection. Because Cyprus is an isolated energy grid without storage, the TSO has the power and the authority to essentially switch off production or curtail, reduce production from renewable energy sources stations in order to ensure the stability of the grid. And to be fair to the TSO, at the early years of penetration of renewables, they went to the other extreme. You know, they always erred on the extreme safe side, but now they are becoming more and more sophisticated, educated because of the operation, and they are doing the best they can to maintain penetration without unduly circumventing it, curtailing it. Now, renewable energy source producers may also be suppliers. They don't need to be suppliers, but they may also be suppliers, but suppliers need not be producers. So after, and that actually came about in 2012, as far back as 2012, it is not necessary for someone to be a producer in order to be a supplier. This is very important to mention. There are significant guarantees requested by the market operator, which are impacting RES producers. That was done in order to ensure that any costs that would be payable by producers for various reasons, I've mentioned one before, failure to provide an accurate forecast, these are backed by guarantees. And I will give you some background on that. There was, again, criticism for that, but I think it's a correct approach. At the moment, we've got about 14 supply licenses in Cyprus. Personally, I would not jump over the moon by having such a high number of suppliers. I do not think that it is necessarily sustainable for the market. And we've had bad examples in Greece, specifically, where we had an introduction of a market model. with the first wave of suppliers significantly defaulting to the extent of criminal cases. I'm not saying that we've got something like that in Cyprus. This was done mainly in the retail market in Greece. But what I'm saying is that we need to ensure that we don't burn a competitive market by allowing people that are thinly capitalized to handle an essential good or service such as electricity service. Yeah. For commercial purposes, the day is divided in 48 30-minute intervals for market purposes. Yeah. Now, this slide is very, very important because it basically indicates the targets of Cyprus on the basis of what we call the National Energy and Climate Plan, the NECP. Yeah. Now, why is the NECP so important? It's important because it essentially governs our binding commitments towards the European Union for the next 10 years. It's the 2020 to 2030 plan. So we are already 2 years in it. There are extremely high targets for the penetration of renewables. They are at 30.3% by 2030. So a substantial increase compared to where we are now. A lot of people confuse the overall targets according to the climate plan with the renewable targets of the plan. This is a common mistake, and I'm very sorry to say that is also an alchemy that government officials might be utilizing at times to confuse the audience on whether we have or have not, or whether we are on track or whether we are not in terms of our climate goals. You will see there that, first of all, production has nothing to do with it. The binding targets are on consumption and not on production. That's one. And number two, you will see that there are different sets of targets. The first one, res H and C share, is on heating and cooling. The second one, which is the one for which I put the arrow next to it, is the electricity consumption target, which is 30.3. And the last one, in which we are horrible, it is our largest shortcoming to date, is the transport one. Yeah. So when people are mentioning targets, we have to be very cautious on what we are talking about. Why do we need to be cautious? Why do we need to be cautious? We need to be cautious because Cyprus struggled to satisfy the 2020 mandatory goal of 13% in consumption. We had to overcome ourselves in order to achieve that target. The success belongs to the private sector, which in a situation of uncertainty due to the pending opening up of the market, went ahead with renewable energy projects. Cyprus had already received the derogation. So even though the EU target for all countries was 20%, we negotiated the derogation back in 2010 to go to 13% because we were moaning that we are an isolated island, which is a reality, of course, but it was also an indirect way to limit the penetration of renewables and limit competition for the utility. It was a protectionism measure to an extent. Yeah, the derogation. The target was largely achieved due to solar water heaters. So our targets were achieved because of that. The 2030 target, as I said, is 30%. But the transmission system is already struggling due to lack of interconnection, lack of storage, production nature of renewables, seasonality and imbalances in demand and supply. So we are struggling already. and we are at, if I'm not mistaken, 16.9% at the moment, and we have to go to 30. Yeah. This means, and for us lawyers, this is very important, that the more penetration we have, and we don't have interconnection or storage, producers will be facing more curtailments, and this will create a commercial, financial, and legal risk for the participants in the market.
Παραλάβε να σου αφήσω ολόκληρο τον χρόνο, διότι δεν βλέπω ερωτήσεις πάνω στην ουσία, οπότε έχει σωστές παρά 10, ακόμα 10 λεπτά. Εκτός αν έρθουν ερωτήσεις μέσα, οπότε...
Okay, basically I only have 2 slides, so okay. I'm glad that I...
We are inviting questions in Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen.
I finished on time, thank you.
Thank you.
So, the ownership of renewables is largely dispersed. So we don't have another EAC, let's say, apart from maybe Bioland, which is a sizable operator with a supply license. The ownership of the rest of the renewables is largely dispersed, which is good from a production perspective, but from a market perspective, it makes things tricky because it increases the number of participants in the market. That is why the concept of aggregator was introduced to reduce this number of participants. The new market model, as I've said, introduces market risks, and these risks have to do with the costs that are provided in cases of deviating from forecast, of not being able to deliver production, not being able to buy supply, etc. And this need to be factored in when we are doing transactional work for players in the market. Yeah, it's not just on the basis of a foreseeable bilateral contract, which is very easy to swallow. The local producers and suppliers that will participate in the market have not been tested yet in a competitive environment. Yeah, we've got companies that have been active in the market, but not in a market of this sophistication and complexity. And we have to see how quickly they will get up to speed and how quickly they will be able to adjust to the realities that the new market model is bringing about. A major obstacle for the market, and especially for the penetration of renewables, is the administrative and bureaucratic processes in the licensing and permitting for renewables. I think this is a common problem, obviously, for the entire governmental mechanism in Cyprus, and it has been mentioned many times. As part of the recovery and resilience plan of Cyprus, there has been recently a tender by DG Reform to modernize the licensing and permitting processes, especially at the level of SERA. There has been an effort by the Ministry of Commerce to create a one-stop shop at the ministry, which is basically coordinating various licensing authorities and stakeholders. But in all honesty, I think we have still a way to go in terms of creating an investment-friendly environment for renewables. To add to that, at the moment, the examination of applications for licensing and permitting of new renewables is frozen at the Department of Environment due to environmental concerns that have been raised and the expectation for the introduction of a new town planning policy. So if you take now an application to the Department of Environment to have a license approved and issued, they will tell you that the process is currently frozen. There has been a study by a private consulting firm advising where different sets of renewables could be installed. To explain to our friends in the audience, we are talking about the huge debates about farming land versus utilizing this land for photovoltaics. We are talking about Natura protected areas and birds, rare birds residing, and Kyriakos will talk about this more later on, so I'm not going to get into it, but this is what we're talking about. Yeah. Now, as I've mentioned, we almost have double in terms of licenses and planned installed capacity than the one we already have installed for renewables. And you can appreciate the nightmare of the transmission system operator when they are now managing a vulnerable situation for the stability of the grid. If they think that they feel that they've got almost an additional equal capacity that is licensed to be installed. Yeah. In all honesty, I think this is half the truth, though, and I'm going to make a comment here for which I feel very strongly. And not many people have raised this point. The owner of the transmission system, which is the EAC, and the transmission system operator as the operator of the system, are submitting what we call the 10-year development plan for the grid. So basically, they come and say, okay, how many projects do I have that are licensed or underway, etc. I've got these substations here where these projects are going to be connected to each other, the distribution of the transmission system. For the next 10 years, we will make these investments, and of course, it includes other investments, the 10-year plan, in order to make sure that we've got a stable and a stable grid. My personal belief is that, unfortunately, this obligation has not been scrutinized enough in the previous 2 decades, and that is why partly we are at the situation where we are now. You can appreciate that the cost of upgrading the system would have been significant, something that would be touching significantly upon the financial position of those involved. Yeah, it would also have an impact, possibly, on the cost of using the grid. So we are at a place now where essentially private producers are being asked to pay out of their pockets the upgrading of substations in Cyprus in order to be connected. Something that, in my view, is definitely not something that is reasonable or I would say tolerable in a free market. I am expecting this topic to become a hot topic in the next few years. Another challenge will be the learning curve of stakeholders for the new market model and the market management system, which cost around 5.5 million. It was a major saga to procure this system. We finally have a winner. And last but not least, the introduction of gas in the internal market through the LNG import terminal at Vasilikos, I don't know if some of you may have seen it on the news, is facing significant obstacles and delays. Why this is important? It is important because gas is one of the ways to achieve a reduction in the price of electricity, and it's also a more efficient fuel than oil. So this is why it's an important shortcoming of the current state of the market, and a critical project, the largest ever project actually in Cyprus.
2 minutes and 2 questions.
I didn't want to, I'm right on time. I didn't want to close with a sort of negative feeling. I'm going to give you some positive news. First of all, market participants are definitely more mature now than 2015 when the market model regulatory decision was issued. This is not a criticism, it's absolutely normal. We are dealing with a new market, and it's only natural that they have gained sophistication. The new law is enhancing institutional maturity, as I've said, and this is critical to have an operational and functioning and competitive market. I don't want to get into politics, but on this matter, I have to say that there is a clear political will to introduce a competitive market. We had a fantastic development with the approval of 657 million by the European Union for the construction of Eurasia interconnector. And I'm jumping from joy because obviously they are my clients and it's a project that I have been working on for a number of years now, and a very challenging project, and I'm really happy for them, not for me, and for the country. We've had another 100 million by the government committed under the Recovery and Resilience Fund. There is already a storage framework introduced, and we are expecting major schemes of up to 90 million euros to come about within the next couple of years. We have elections or so you can appreciate that announcements will be coming up. In this case, we hope that we will not only be remaining on announcements, but that we will be seeing a fruition of this. So this is my presentation. I hope it has been informative to you. Once again, thank you very much. 2 questions you said, Leah, happy to answer.
We thank you for this excellent presentation, Haralambe. Thank you very much. From Mr. Yannis Tetralis, any updates time frame regarding the new environmental criteria?
The new environmental criteria, as I said, has been concluded. The study has been concluded, and there is high pressure to defreeze essentially the process before summer.
Thank you.
Okay,
I have a question. For some reason, I don't have the ability to put it on the Q&A. I don't know why. You said that because of the design of the model, you don't expect any reduction in prices. Can you explain it a bit more?
Yeah. Basically, when you have a player like the EAC is locked in a cost structure that is difficult to change. There are 2 major components, basically, when we are talking about the cost element. One is the fuel, and the other one is the payroll. EAC does not have substantial ability to drastically change either of the 2 components of its major cost. For this reason, like telecoms, in the first years of the market, and due to extremely high fuel prices, which are dictating at the end of the day the price of electricity for a big chunk of the market, I'm expecting suppliers to piggyback, if I can call it like that, on the high cost of EAC, offering a reduction, let's say, on that cost. This is for them a very sound thing to do, because obviously they are new entrants. They do not have the market share or the ability of EAC to conduct profits, and they need to strengthen their capital positions and to increase their market share in the market by essentially relying on their agility and on their marketing. Yeah. For this reason, in the first years of the market, I am not expecting dramatic changes. However, if the situation with the price of oil continues to be where it is now, we might see what we had seen in the past, which is basically an auction of pricing for the purchase of renewables, which is now not allowed under the current regime, correctly so in my view, from a competition perspective. But we might see that happening in the future. Nice. In the midterm, I expect the prices to start dropping for the simple reason of gaining more and more market share, like we have seen in the telecoms.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? No. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ, Χαράλαμπε. Προχωρήσουμε στον Κυριάκο and to our second topic, which are the environmental impact assessments and the Cyprus reality. Introducing Kyriakos. Kyriakos got his LLB from Leicester University. He's a barrister of Lincoln's Inn, and he has an LLM in EU environmental law, international natural resources law, and international law of the sea from the Queen Mary University. He is the founder and director of KA Gurtelos & Co. LLC, and he's experienced in project development and transactional work across a wide range of industries and sectors, including, of course, energy and environment. Kyriakos, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Haralambe, for your presentation. And good afternoon, everyone, from me as well. Thank you for being here and thank you for your time. I'll be touching on the subject of environmental impact assessments, referring to the Cyprus reality. Let me share my presentation.
Μια χαρά.
Okay. Now, let me give you an outline of this presentation, starting off with what is an environmental assessment, the applicable EU directive, and how it's been aligned within Cyprus, how environmental assessment relates to sustainable development, then address the scope of the law, its theory, and how it's applied in practice, concluding with the Cyprus reality. I'll be asking now whether environmental assessment is a positive idea, and we can try answer it later on. Environmental assessment essentially lies at the heart of environmental protection, for which there are two key principles. First, the precautionary principle, where you have to attack the damage at its source before it begins. And second, the polluters pays principle. In other words, the developer must pay for any damage caused. The reason for this legislation is risk assessment and risk avoidance. The whole process basically wants to enable a more informed decision to be made before a project starts. Now, turning to the EU directive of 2011 as amended in 2014. It was, as you see, first announced in the 70s. It's one of the longest standing approaches in the EU from which other forms of assessment have evolved. It was highly controversial and contested from the relevant competent authorities, given their previous monopoly power over the application processes and eventual consent of any development. Nonetheless, despite such controversy, it was adopted in 1985 and then amended several times since. The most recent applicable law in Cyprus by which the EU legislation has been aligned with is Law 127 of 2018. A clarification here at the outset is that the Environmental Impact Assessment Directive and respective Cyprus law relate to projects or policies, whereas for plants, the applicable EU directive is the Strategic Environmental Assessment Directive of 2001, as amended again since, with its applicable legislation in Cyprus, although beyond the scope of this presentation. We will only be addressing the environmental impact assessment legislation. Now, I think everyone is aware, especially in recent years, and since the COVID pandemic, that a few buzzwords, popular terms have been used, such as CSR, for example, corporate social responsibility, corporate responsibility, in other words, or ESG, environmental and social governance, which, as long as they are used properly, I am personally fine with, and not as mere, say, marketing terms. Let me put it that way. Now, can development ever really be sustainable? We'll try and answer this as well. Environmental assessment does relate to sustainable development, as first pointed out by the Brundtland report in 1987, and this is how far back environmental assessment and the concept of sustainable development go. It was further enhanced by the Rio Declaration in 1992 on environment and development. Essentially, the Rio Declaration defined the relation between states and individuals and how they address environment and development. One of the first key cases, for example, was New Zealand v. France in the International Court of Justice in 1995, also known as the nuclear tests case, where New Zealand instituted proceedings against France, and ever since it gave room for many others to come. Since these reports, declarations, and so on, we have seen numerous new commitments, starting from, say, the Green Deal, most recently, or many UN reports, say on climate change, for example, to reach emission targets, which Harald Bosch addressed earlier as well. Sustainable development goals. Let me use this photo here just to show how this staff member of the World Food Programme is actually teaching a student in Nigeria about the Sustainable Development Goals. He's even pointing at zero hunger. I'm not sure how this can be achieved, or any one of these can be achieved anytime soon. But I use this as an example to stress that the reason for these, or for environmental protection, or for sustainable development, is toward the best interest of current and future generations, right? Maybe enough damage has been done and we can either rectify or proceed with caution from now on. Turning to the scope of the assessment process. I remember my professor, Panos Merkouris, stressing the key difficulty with environmental assessment from its starting point being to identify what is significant. Very difficult. The law tries to, giving certain criteria, for example, in its annexes, which we will address later, but the writing of the law itself is already causing trouble. Needless to stress the potential of risks or accidents or disasters that can happen with major developments, and therefore caution is needed to prevent them, right? We've seen or heard of some catastrophic events. both locally and worldwide. There are some good examples. And coincidentally, let me use another photo, which I picked for two different reasons. One being, it was the most mild example I could find. I won't be addressing biodiversity damage as such, birds covered in oil and whatnot. And secondly, because it reminds me of the pier in Limassol, which I grew up in, and I think everyone enjoys the beaches of Limassol. This is from the aftermath of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Totally coincidentally, since this seminar was organized on the 20th, and I picked this up later, this happened exactly 12 years ago to date, on the 20th of April of 2010. So you can imagine the detrimental effects or devastating effects that could occur if the appropriate steps are not taken or the right process is not followed. With severe potential damage in both our territorial seas and exclusive economic zone. Now, a bit more theory here. The first step of the environmental impact assessment is screening and the selection of projects for environmental assessment, therefore turning back to what is significant and what not. With a lot of discretion being given to decision makers about whether to apply the assessment process to projects or not. Now, in a few words, projects in Annex 1 of the directive and law are mandatory. Projects in Annex 2 remain at the discretion of, say, the member state or competent authority of such member state. And then further subject to the criteria in Annex 3. I will read out some of this slide as I intended. Now, major projects listed in Annex 1, including crude oil refineries, power stations, waste disposal installations, extraction of petroleum and natural gas for commercial purposes, dams, pipelines, poultry or pigs, we have a recent local example, in fact, must always be subject to prior environmental assessment. These are mandatory, with each subject to their own criteria depending on size, nature, or location. Whereas for the projects listed under Annex 2, for example, water management, afforestation, deforestation, I was reading on the news today, again, a local example where they had instructions to trim some parks in Nicosia, I believe, and they cut down 10, 20-year-old trees. Just an example. This happened today. So for these projects listed under Annex 2, there must be an environmental assessment only where member states or the competent authority considers are required. To help the authority determine whether the projects listed in Annex 2 should be subject to an environmental impact assessment, Annex 3 contains further relevant criteria. Under the Cyprus law, an environmental committee has been formed. This is under Article 10, subsection 1 of the law, η Επιτροπή Εκτίμησης Επιπτώσεων στο Περιβάλλον, η οποία εξετάζει τις επιπτώσεις του έργου στο περιβάλλον και μέτρα αντιμετώπισης τους. Now, following step one, the next step, and there are 4 steps, so this won't take much longer. Following step one, the next step of the process being scoping, which is one of the main rationales for environmental assessment. It's the gathering and dissemination of information related to the project. It's the responsibility on the developer to provide this information in the form of an environmental statement. This environmental statement is prepared by an expert environmental consultant, for example, an engineer. The competent authority may also issue a scoping opinion when needed, and such scoping opinion can outline what they would like to see in such statement. For example, a description of the project, the measures to mitigate any effects, the data used to collect the information, and any possible alternatives. As you can see, Article 26 of the Cyprus law outlines the content of the study. A very important aspect of environmental assessment are the rights of the public, that they have to, say, intervene, or not as such, better put, give an opinion on the project at hand. You may be familiar with the Aarhus Convention, on which a presentation was given recently, again, by the committee. This really strengthened the Environmental Impact Assessment Directive, giving serious rights to the public to be consulted and make representations, therefore giving their opinion on the project. In Cyprus, for example, when there is such case, as you see, based on Section 27, when a project is about to be made, there is a publication in 2 newspapers of wide circulation, and a publication in the website of the Environmental Authority. Therefore, step 3 comes in, where the consultation and participation of the public takes place. This gives the public an early opportunity to participate. And the key word here is before the decision of the development consent is made. Say a wind farm is intended to be developed in your neighborhood. One wind farm or one wind turbine may be okay, 20 maybe not. So local residents may express their opinion before consent is given. So just to turn back, in my view, there should be, if not already, greater respect for the public in such decision making. What difference does it make? Going back to our initial question, and we can try answering this together, whether environmental assessment was a positive idea to begin with. Its purpose is to create a rethinking of the whole process. We need to consider equally both environmental, social, and economic issues, with the intention of striking a good balance between all. I'm not against development. We could try and make it sustainable. So essentially, it's expected that decisions will be reoriented towards outcomes which favor environmental protection. I understand, this sounds quite positive. Favor environmental protection over development. We can try. I still think we're a bit far off. And despite initial hope of the drafting of the Environmental Impact Assessment Directive and whatnot, and going back. Based on recent studies in the UK specifically, unfortunately, the process has only given a gradual and not revolutionary effect in decision making. In other words, projects are still going ahead despite detrimental environmental impacts. Now, I'm concluding more or less. I wanted to keep this short and sweet. Turning to the Cyprus reality, given we are here, although in my view, these issues and problems exist elsewhere as well, due to the nature of the matter. There are some concerns, serious concerns, and hopefully solutions can be found, again, sooner than later. A key issue occurring is the client relation between any developer and their environmental consultant or consultants. If you don't do it for me the way I want it, I'll pay someone else to do it for me the way I want it. For example, sorry to put it that way. As a result, we see some environmental studies or assessments being given a more favorable light than what may be appropriate. Favorable light or gloss, it's been put as that way as well, in order to get a project cleared. Θα το πω ελληνικά, κυπριακά, δεν το κάνεις εσύ όπως το θέλω, να πληρώσω άλλον να μην το κάνει. The second issue noticed is the functional separation required between any competent authority and the developer. To be totally fair, the relevant Cyprus law has serious safeguards against this. It even provides for an external auditor to review the process where needed. In my view, one of the most important issues could be the quality of environmental studies, again with severe credit to local experts as well, who have submitted exceptional both environmental impact assessments and strategic environmental assessments with experience second to none, some of them at least, without being able to provide more details now. But the quality could improve throughout, and the only way to do this is going to the next fourth point, would be having stricter, more stringent requirements for the studies. But it's not only good enough to have the requirements, you have to meet them and make sure they are being fulfilled. And we'll turn to monitoring afterwards. As I mentioned, there are some important and useful safeguards provided for by the Cyprus legislation. For example, the implementation of an expert consultant registry. You may have 20 experts. Maybe not all of them are suitable or qualified for purpose. So an expert consultant registry could help identify, register who can carry out the environmental studies. Unfortunately, as far as I know, it has not been implemented yet, whereas it should be as stipulated by the law. Having mentioned stricter requirements needed and whatnot, and those being fulfilled, the next issue arising is, unfortunately, inadequate monitoring of the terms and conditions of the studies, of the assessments. mainly due to practical difficulties, again, as far as I'm aware. Due to several reasons, one of them being public authorities being understaffed. It may sound as a surprise in Cyprus for some, I don't know, but this is a key issue. I mean, the environmental authority does not have 100 on-site wardens to send around to each project or on a 24-hour basis, to observe if the conditions have been complied with. So this is a serious issue that should be addressed somehow. Closing off with perhaps a more extreme example is the risk of some developments starting actually prior to issuance even of the license, and therefore not observing neither the environmental study, neither the requirements to be fulfilled. They will actually start building, or a simple example, deforestation of the relevant area in order to start development before the assessment has even been studied, let alone issuance of the license. So since everybody is sort of quoting somebody else nowadays, I thought I'd close off with this and use Mr. Shaw's famous quote of progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything. So thank you very much.
We thank you.
I wish you all the best and a happy Easter from me.
We thank you,
Kyriakos. Thank you.
Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. We were expecting a positive note in the end, to be quite honest, but Bernard Shaw's quote is good enough for the Cyprus reality. Let's hope that everybody in this webinar at least will have the will to change minds and thoughts. Να δούμε αν έχουμε ερωτήσεις, μια στιγμούλα. Χαράλαμπ, ευχαριστούμε. Δεν βλέπω ερωτήσεις. Μελίνα, θέλεις να ρωτήσεις κάτι?
Όχι, θέλω να ρωτήσω κάτι, αλλά θέλω να ευχαριστήσω πάρα πολλά και τον Χαράλαμπο και τον Κυριάκο. Ήταν πάρα πολλά καλές οι παρουσιάσεις τους. Και πραγματικά τα θέματα τούτα δεν είναι καθόλου εύκολα. Και ήταν μια πάρα πολλά καλή ευκαιρία, πιστεύω, για τους συναδέλφους να ενημερωθούν για τον τομέα, που νομίζω ότι έχει πολλούς συναδέλφους που δεν ασχοληθήκαν, αλλά θεωρώ ότι σιγά σιγά όλοι πρέπει να ενημερωνόμαστε για τον τομέα και νομίζω ότι η Επιτροπή μας έκανε καλή δουλειά επιλέγοντας αυτά τα θέματα.
Πράγματι, ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Ήταν και πολύ καλά και practically και theoretically. Και βλέπω και τα συγχαρητήρια που λαμβάνετε από το κοινό μας, το οποίο έφτασε πάνω από 300 άτομα. Εντάξει, τώρα είναι στα 275, αλλά ήδη έχει λήξει το webinar, οπότε I think we did well. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ. Να ευχηθώ καλό Πάσχα, καλή Ανάσταση σε όλους και θα τα πούμε ξανά το συντομότερο.
Thank you.